Imagine standing in the middle of a crowded square in ancient Athens, listening to Socrates ask uncomfortable questions that force people to stop, reflect and challenge their own assumptions. Now fast forward to today. Instead of a quiet square filled with dialogue, we are surrounded by endless noise, tweets, headlines, clickbait, and opinions shouted into the digital void. Instead of Socrates asking why, we have influencers telling us what to think. And instead of communities built on reasoning, we have tribes built on outrage. This is the world we live in. A world where critical thinking is slowly disappearing. Not because people have lost the ability to think, but because the culture around us discourages it at every turn. In its place rises something far more dangerous: collective stupidity, the blind acceptance of whatever narrative keeps us safe inside the herd. In this video, we explore this troubling transformation through 7 parts. Today, in the first 2, we will uncover what critical thinking really means and the mechanisms by which it is vanishing before our eyes. Along the way, we'll draw from the insights of one of today's most discussed philosophers, Agnes Callard, who argues that philosophy begins, not with certainty, but with the courage to admit confusion. So let us begin our journey into the disappearance of independent thought. Part 1. What critical thinking really means. Critical thinking is often misunderstood. Some equate it with cynicism, the knee-jerk rejection of authority. Others reduce it to fact-checking or playing devil's advocate. But true critical thinking is neither skepticism for its own sake nor contrarianism disguised as intelligence. It is, at its core, the disciplined process of seeking truth through reasoning, questioning, and reflection. The roots of this discipline stretch deep into history. Socrates, through his dialogues, taught that wisdom begins with admitting one's ignorance. Descartes, centuries later, doubted everything, even his own senses, until he could find a foundation that could not be shaken. Modern science, democracy, and education itself all grew out of this tradition. The belief that truth is not given, but discovered through examination. To think critically means holding 2 principles at once: intellectual humility and intellectual courage. Humility allows us to accept that we might be wrong. Courage pushes us to challenge the comfort of conformity, even when doing so makes us unpopular. But here is where the tragedy begins. While society praises the idea of free thought, in practice it cultivates conditions that stifle it. Our schools often reward memorization over curiosity. Our workplaces reward compliance over questioning. And our digital platforms reward outrage over nuance. Agnes Callard reminds us that philosophy begins in aporia, Greek word meaning puzzlement or confusion. To think critically, we must tolerate not knowing. We must resist the urge to instantly take sides. Yet our culture has no patience for confusion. Opinions must be formed instantly, shared immediately, and defended fiercely, even when they rest on shaky ground. The disappearance of critical thinking, then, is not a sudden collapse but a slow erosion. Like a shoreline eaten away by the sea, the habit of deep reflection fades quietly, until one day we look around and realize it is almost gone. Part 2. The mechanisms of disappearance. If critical thinking is so valuable, why is it vanishing? The answer lies in the forces shaping modern life. 3 stand out above all: speed, conformity, and distraction. 1. The speed of information. In past centuries, debates unfolded across decades. Philosophers wrote letters, published treatises, and engaged in discussions that demanded patience. Today, public discourse lives and dies within hours. A trending post can sway millions before fact-checkers even have time to respond. The rapid cycle of news, updates, and reactions leaves little room for reflection. Thinking by its nature requires slowness, but our digital environment punishes slowness as irrelevance. The faster the flow of information, the weaker our ability to analyze it. 2. The pressure of conformity. Humans are tribal by nature. For most of history, this instinct was necessary for survival. But in the digital age, conformity no longer protects us, it imprisons us. Online, every community enforces its own dogma. To disagree is to risk ridicule, cancellation, or exile from the tribe. The result is not dialogue but echo chambers. People do not think through issues independently. They adopt whatever opinion secures them belonging. Slowly, the habit of independent judgment erodes. 3. The weapon of distraction. Critical thinking requires focused attention, but attention is now the scarcest commodity. Social media platforms are designed to fracture our concentration, keeping us addicted to the next swipe, the next notification, the next fragment of novelty. Reflection becomes uncomfortable, even boring. Instead of sustained thought, we get constant reaction. Instead of analysis, we get headlines. Instead of nuance, we get slogans. Agnes Callard has pointed out that even intellectual spaces have become infected by performance. Philosophical debates, once a pursuit of truth, often degrade into stage spectacles, where the goal is to appear clever rather than to discover wisdom. This mirrors the broader cultural decay. The appearance of thought replaces the substance of thought. What emerges from these mechanisms is not open ignorance, but something far worse: collective stupidity, a kind of herd-like state where groups confidently adopt false beliefs, spread them at lightning speed, and punish anyone who dares to question them. Unlike ignorance, which admits not knowing, collective stupidity disguises itself as certainty. It is arrogant, loud, and self-assured, yet hollow at the core. And here lies the danger. A society that abandons critical thinking may appear vibrant with opinions, debates, and hot takes, but beneath the surface it is intellectually fragile. It becomes easy prey for manipulation, for propaganda, for charismatic leaders who thrive on unexamined beliefs. Without the discipline of questioning, the crowd becomes a mob. Without the courage to doubt, freedom itself begins to fade. Part 3. The seduction of collective stupidity. To understand why critical thinking is disappearing, we must also understand what is replacing it. The vacuum left by independent thought is not silence, it is filled with what we might call collective stupidity. But what does this mean? Collective stupidity is not the absence of intelligence. In fact, many of its participants are highly educated, well-informed, and articulate. It is rather the abandonment of critical judgment in favor of blind group loyalty. It thrives wherever people repeat opinions without examination, defend beliefs they have never questioned, and conform to narratives simply because those narratives give them belonging. Consider the way misinformation spreads online. A false story may be debunked within hours, but if it confirms what a community already wants to believe, it continues to circulate. Those who challenge it are dismissed not with counter-arguments, but with insults. You're naive. You're brainwashed. You're the enemy. In such an environment, truth becomes irrelevant. What matters is loyalty to the group. Agnes Callard often reminds her students that the hardest part of philosophy is not learning new ideas, but unlearning the old certainties that anchor our identity. This is precisely why collective stupidity is so seductive. It spares us the discomfort of doubt. To think critically is to risk losing the approval of our peers. To think collectively is to enjoy the comfort of belonging. History is filled with tragic examples. In medieval Europe, people who questioned religious dogma were branded heretics. In totalitarian regimes of the 20th century, dissenters were labeled traitors or enemies of the state. In each case, collective stupidity did not emerge from ignorance, but from fear, the fear of standing alone against the crowd. Today, the mechanisms are more subtle but no less powerful. Instead of inquisitions, we have cancel culture. Instead of book burnings, we have algorithmic suppression. Instead of state propaganda, we have influencers, bots, and viral campaigns. The tools have changed, but the logic remains the same. Conformity is rewarded, questioning is punished. And so, collective stupidity thrives not because people are foolish, but because they are human. It speaks to our deepest instincts, to belong, to be safe, to avoid conflict. But the cost of this comfort is devastating, the slow death of individual reason. Part 4. The role of technology in eroding thought. Technology, of course, accelerates this decline. What began as tools for connection have become engines of distraction and manipulation. The internet was once celebrated as a marketplace of ideas, a digital Athens where every voice could be heard. Instead, it has become a battleground of noise, where algorithms, not reason, decide which ideas survive. Social media, in particular, is hostile to critical thinking. Its design rewards speed over depth, outrage over nuance, and conformity over originality. Posts that provoke anger travel farther than those that invite reflection. Content that confirms our biases is promoted. Content that challenges them is buried. The very architecture of these platforms discourages thought and encourages reaction. Agnes Callard has noted that philosophy cannot survive without slow dialogue, long conversations that stretch over hours, days, even years. But technology compresses time into seconds. A philosopher may spend years writing a book, only to see its ideas reduced to a quote on Instagram or a soundbite on TikTok. Complexity is flattened into simplicity. Questions are replaced by slogans. The patience required for thinking is replaced by the impatience of scrolling. Worse still, the digital age has blurred the boundary between reality and illusion. Deepfakes, misinformation campaigns, and AI-generated content make it increasingly difficult to distinguish truth from fiction. If reality itself can be fabricated, what hope does critical thinking have? The skeptical mind grows exhausted, unsure of what can be trusted. And in that exhaustion, many retreat to the comfort of group narratives, choosing loyalty over truth. The result is a paradox. We live in the most informed age in history, and yet we are increasingly incapable of wisdom. Knowledge is abundant, but wisdom is scarce. Information flows freely, but discernment dries up. Technology meant to empower thought instead erodes it. Part 5. Education and the death of independent minds. If critical thinking is to survive, surely education should be its last stronghold. Yet in many ways, the modern education system has become one of its greatest obstacles. Schools often claim to teach critical thinking, but in practice they reward conformity. Students are trained to memorize, to pass tests, to produce the answers teachers expect. Original thought, risk-taking, and questioning authority are rarely rewarded. In fact, they are often punished. The result is a generation of students who excel at compliance, but struggle with independence. Agnes Callard, as a teacher of philosophy, insists that real learning requires discomfort. Students must be willing to face confusion, to wrestle with uncertainty, to admit ignorance. Yet our schools often do the opposite. They prize clarity, efficiency, and measurable outcomes. Confusion is treated as failure rather than the starting point of wisdom. Universities, too, are not immune. In theory, they are spaces for free inquiry. In practice, many are constrained by ideological conformity, bureaucratic incentives, and the fear of offending. Professors hesitate to challenge students. Students hesitate to challenge professors. Debate gives way to agreement. Exploration gives way to dogma. Even worse, education is increasingly treated as a commodity. Degrees are purchased, grades are negotiated, and learning is reduced to career preparation. The question is no longer, what is true, But what will get me a job? In such an environment, the pursuit of wisdom is sidelined in favor of practical utility. Critical thinking becomes not a way of life but a disposable luxury. The tragedy is that education should be the antidote to collective stupidity, not its accomplice. It should produce citizens capable of questioning authority, challenging narratives, and thinking for themselves. Instead, it often produces graduates who know how to obey, how to perform, how to signal intelligence without practicing it. And so, as students leave classrooms and enter the digital world, they are ill-equipped to resist the pressures of conformity and distraction. Their intellectual muscles, never truly exercised, are weak. Their philosophical instincts, never nurtured, are dormant. The system that should have empowered them to think critically has, instead, prepared them to join the ranks of collective stupidity. Part 6. The Psychology of Herd Thinking. To understand why critical thinking collapses so easily, we must look not only at culture and technology, but at the human mind itself. Our psychology is wired for survival, and survival often means blending into the group. Psychologists describe this as herd thinking, the tendency to adopt the beliefs and behaviors of those around us, even when they contradict reason. Experiments like Solomon Ash's famous conformity studies reveal how powerful this instinct is. In his experiment, participants were asked to judge the length of lines on a card. When everyone else in the room deliberately gave the wrong answer, most participants conformed even when their own eyes told them the truth was different. Why? Because isolation is terrifying. To stand alone against the group triggers deep anxiety, a primal fear of rejection. For our ancestors, being cast out of the tribe meant death. That instinct still lives in us today. And so when a crowd shouts one thing, it takes extraordinary courage to whisper another. This is why Agnes Callard's emphasis on aporia, embracing confusion, is so radical. To admit you are unsure while the group demands certainty is to risk ridicule. To question when others have already chosen sides is to stand alone. Yet this is precisely what critical thinking requires: the willingness to place truth above belonging. Modern society, however, punishes this courage. The digital mob moves quickly, branding dissenters as traitors, fools, or enemies. Rational debate is replaced by moral outrage. And so even intelligent individuals fall silent, surrendering their doubts in order to remain part of the collective. The danger is clear. A society where no one dares to question becomes fertile ground for manipulation. Herd thinking does not merely produce bad ideas, it amplifies them, turning lies into dogmas, mistakes into movements, and ignorance into orthodoxy. Once this process begins, it becomes nearly impossible to stop. Part 7. Can critical thinking be saved? If critical thinking is disappearing, the urgent question is, can it be saved? Or are we doomed to sink deeper into collective stupidity? The answer is not simple. Critical thinking cannot be restored by technology alone, nor by education systems as they currently stand. It requires a cultural and personal transformation. First, we must rediscover the value of slowness. Reflection takes time. Wisdom does not come in sound bites or tweets. To think critically, we must create spaces, both individually and collectively, where speed is not rewarded, where silence is allowed, where questions are more important than answers. Second, we must cultivate intellectual humility, the willingness to admit ignorance, to question even our deepest beliefs, is the foundation of all critical thought. This humility is rare in a culture obsessed with certainty, but it is essential. Agnes Callard often reminds her students that admitting confusion is not weakness, but strength, because it opens the door to genuine understanding. Third, we must embrace intellectual courage. To think critically is to risk standing alone. It is to endure misunderstanding, ridicule, and sometimes even hostility. But history's greatest minds, from Socrates to Galileo to Martin Luther King, Junior, all chose truth over conformity. Without their courage, civilization itself would not have advanced. Finally, we must reform our institutions, schools, media, and digital platforms so that they reward reflection rather than performance. Education must encourage questioning, not just compliance. Media must prioritize accuracy over sensationalism. Technology must be designed to support, rather than sabotage, our capacity for thought. Can all this be achieved? Perhaps not fully. But even small acts of resistance matter. Each time one person chooses to reflect rather than react, to question rather than conform, to listen rather than shout, critical thinking takes root again.